Hi, and welcome to Tales of Two Cities. I'm Lisa Pitassi. If I were to tell you we were in Boston, what images come to mind? This? Or this? Both would be correct depending on where you live or where you've been. In these series of programs, we'll look at places that have the same name or share similar names. We'll see what they have in common, how they differ, and the historical and cultural links between them. So let's start in Boston, England, and to be more precise, in the county of Lincolnshire.
Actually, Lisa, it's pronounced Lincolnshire. Hello, I'm Edmund Whitehouse, and while Lisa takes you on a tour of Boston, Massachusetts, I'm going to take you on a tour of the original Boston here in the east of England, in the heart of the Fens. In fact, it could be described as the jewel of the Fens. St. Botolph was the patron saint of seamen, and Botolph's town became Boston. Behind me you can see a remarkable sight, St. Botolph's, the largest parish church in England. The magnificent tower of St. Botolph's Church was built by prosperous merchants in the 14th and 15th centuries. It can be seen as far out to sea as 40 miles, and for all I know, it can probably be heard out there as well.
A very different view here of downtown Boston, Massachusetts. We'll look at this Boston a little later, but let's go back to Edmund in Lincolnshire and take a closer look at the older Boston.
Once a year, a huge annual fair was held in Boston, which drew traders from all over England and also from the continent. The religious orders were also quite well known here. The Dominicans, the Augustinians, the Franciscans and the Carmelites all had houses here. The guilds grew very rich indeed, but did remember the poor, and once a year on the Feast of Purification, they specially donated 1,000 loaves and 1,000 herrings to those less fortunate than themselves.
It's 1607, and King James I of England has been on the throne for 4 years. Meanwhile, out in America, a group of settlers are building Jamestown at Chesapeake Bay in Virginia. Their leader is Captain John Smith, who was born at Willoughby, not very far from here. Incidentally, also born close to here was John Rolfe, who made a name for himself by marrying the famous Indian squaw Pocahontas. Here, on the banks of the River Witham, just outside Boston, is a memorial which marks the spot where a group of separatists, led by William Brewster and including the young William Bradford, hoped to set sail on a ship which was to take them to Holland, where they were going to gain religious freedom.
But they were betrayed by the Dutch captain and brought here to the Guildhall for trial and imprisoned in these cells. Eventually, however, they were released and made their way via Holland and then via Plymouth in Devon to the American states, which were then known as the New World. Eventually, of course, they became known as the Pilgrim Fathers. Is somebody going to let me out of here? Help! Help!
From 1580 to the 1630s, Boston in Lincolnshire was the hotbed of Puritanism. In fact, the Puritans wanted to purify from within the rituals of the Church of England by actually removing them. The Reverend John Cotton was vicar here for 20 years, and during that time his powerful sermons attracted huge congregations, and they included a large number of very important people. In 1629, when the Puritans joined the Massachusetts Bay Company, a great deal of financial support and leadership came from Lincolnshire. In fact, 10% of Boston's population emigrated to America. In 1630, a significant group of people left for America. Led by John Winthrop, they included several members of the Earl of Lincoln's family and his servants. 3 years later, it was John Cotton himself who led another prominent band of people across the water, this time including several men who were born leaders and governors.
John Cotton became the first teacher of the Boston Church, which was the direct ancestor of the first and second church of Boston. And it was in his honor that the name Boston was given to this city. The men from the old Boston governed the Massachusetts colony for all but 4 of its first 56 years.
And they're commemorated in a memorial in St. Botolph's Church in the old Boston.
Here we are standing in front of the John Winthrop statue, right located here at the first and second church. With me I have John Sears, the direct descendant of John Winthrop and Thomas Dudley. Well, John, what can you tell us about your ancestors?
Well, Governor Winthrop and Governor Dudley had a little falling out over where the capital of the brand new little province would be located. Dudley thought Winthrop had promised to move with him to Cambridge, which is one town over, and Winthrop quite preferred and loved it in Boston. However, later their children married, and their grandchildren from a different part of the family married, so all was well.
All is well, so now they're all friends. With me is Leo Collins, who is a longtime member of the church. Leo, what can you tell me about the history of the church?
Well, I could tell you quite a bit, Lisa, since we're 372 years old. But I think your folks would like to know that we were formed back in 1630 by members of the community of Old Boston. Among them was John Cotton, the vicar of St. Botolph. He was our outstanding minister, particularly in the sense of writing the new rulings for congregational polity, church governance, developing a system whereby the members own the church, where the members support the church, where the members select a minister. And that whole congregational approach was what developed in the New World and has developed throughout our country, those properties of having the lay people involved in the church.
In 1691, the Plymouth colony was absorbed into Massachusetts and were welcomed by the governor at that time, Simon Bradstreet. He would have been 4 years old and living 15 miles from where Edmund showed us when William Brewster and party made their first unsuccessful attempt to flee to Holland. We can't complete a look at the history of Boston without referring to the Boston Tea Party, one of the significant events of the American War of Independence.
I suppose not. Our King George III got it into his head that the colonies weren't paying enough taxes, so he decided to put a tax on tea.
The colonists didn't like this, so they dumped a whole load of it, destined for the East India Company, into the harbor.
King George didn't like that one little bit, so he ordered the harbor to be closed.
And the colonists liked that even less. It stoked the fires of revolution, which led to America breaking away from the mother country.
Well, it could have been worse. If Britain had won, we might still be in charge. Heaven forbid.
It's lucky for us all that you didn't then. Anyway, from those small colonial beginnings, Boston has grown into the city we see today. One of the best views of the city is on the skywalk on top of the Prudential Tower, which is open to visitors every day. Built in 1965, this was the first skyscraper in the Back Bay, and it's part of the Prudential Center, which also includes shops and offices.
From one tall building to another, the Prudential Tower is over 700 feet high, and I'm standing on St Botolph's Tower, commonly known as the Stump, but we are actually less than 300 feet high, although it's the tallest building for miles. There are more than 50,000 people living in and around Boston. It's a largely agricultural area, and many people earn their living on the land or in services connected to farming. The River Witham winds through the town. In the past, Boston was a very large port, doing as much trade as London, shipping wool to Northern Europe and bringing back cloth, wine and other goods. But today, the main trade is with timber, with grain, and behind me you can see steel, which is being imported from Belgium. Keith Richardson is the Deputy Operations Manager of Boston. Keith, I understand there's an interesting story about how this dock was actually built. Can you tell us about that?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, the port was built in 1881 and was actually dug out by the people of Boston by hand.
The people of Boston actually came and dug it out by hand.
Right. They brought shovels, horses and carts, and basically carted the stuff away into the town and to the local fields, mainly by hand, horse and cart.
Well, that's extraordinary,
Right.
Keith. Thank you very much.
Okay.
It's market day, and the traders are selling their wares. In fact, there's been a market here in Boston since 1204, when King John first granted the charter.
A plaque on the wall of Martha's Vineyard pub marks the birthplace of John Foxe, the 16th century author of the Book of Martyrs, a great source of inspiration and motivation for both the Puritan and separatist movements. This is Fidel House, remodelled on a grand scale in 1726 for William Fidel. It's now used as a college, but inside, one of the rooms has been set aside for the use of American visitors.
I wonder how many of them know that.
Well, Joseph Kennedy obviously did. He was the father of US President John F. Kennedy, and in 1938, as the US ambassador to Britain, came here to open this American room behind me and dedicated it to the future use of all American visitors. Behind me is a large portrait of John Leverett and two smaller pictures of Richard Bellingham and Simon Bradstreet, who were all early governors of Massachusetts. During the 15th and 16th centuries, there were several religious orders here. Today, only the Dominican friary remains, and you can see it behind me now as the Blackfriars Arts Centre. The town also contains some narrow alleys, improved by the wrought ironwork at each end, and retail activity has spilled out from the market square into Straight Bargate and Wide Bargate. This is the Maud Foster windmill on a very breezy day. It was built in 1819 and has recently been restored, so visitors can now come and see it in action. They can climb to the top and they can still buy flour here. Here we are outside the windmill, and with me is the miller Tom Waterfield. Tom, can you tell me when the mill was first opened after it was redeveloped?
Yes, 1988.
So you've been the miller here for 14 years.
Yes.
And do you enjoy your work?
Oh, yes.
I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
Could you tell us anything about the machinery? Is it the original machinery?
Most of it is original from here upwards, yes.
Right.
But there are all the sails are new or been replaced from 88.
So we've got new sails from 1988.
Yeah.
And it's all driven by the wind?
Of course, yes.
Well, that's absolutely amazing. Thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.
How can we sum up Botolph's town? Well, I'd say it's a very pleasant English country market town indeed, but it's very different to its sister city, or should that be daughter city, across the Atlantic.
You can say that again. My, how the baby has grown. This Boston is home to 600,000 people, with 2.5 million living in the surrounding metropolitan area. It's a vibrant, cosmopolitan city, and as Edmund said, a complete contrast of the little town of Boston, England, after which it was named. The best place to start a tour is here on Boston Common. This is where the colonists group to protest against British rule. The formal English-style public garden next to the Boston Common was created in 1869 based on a design by George Meacham. The swan boats, inspired by Wagner's opera Lohengrin, have been sailing around the lake since 1877. Here you can see a red line painted on the sidewalk. It's the start of the 2.5-mile-long Freedom Trail, which guides visitors to Boston's historic landmarks. It weaves its way through the city to Bunkers Hill in Charlestown and passes by several sites relating to the American Revolution. If you don't want to walk the Freedom Trail, then you can buy a day ticket for one of the tourist trolley buses, which take you around the city, allowing you to hop on and off throughout the day. Our first stop is the Massachusetts State House, built after the War of Independence. The cornerstone was laid by Samuel Adams and Paul Revere, heroes of the Revolution. This statue is in memory of the firebrand Anne Hutchinson, America's first campaigner for women's rights. Other landmarks on the trail include the Old South Meeting House, the Old State House, and the Paul Revere House. In 1775, 2 lanterns were hung in the belfry of the Old North Church by the sexton Robert Newman to signal that British troops were on their way. This is Paul Revere's house. He is famous for his legendary ride to Lexington to warn his compatriots of the impending arrival of the British Army.
Yes, indeed. But did you know that although he was half French Huguenot, his maternal great-grandmother was a baby who set sail from Old Boston in 1641?
These old Bostonians get in the act everywhere.
They certainly do.
Edmund showed us the marketplace in Old Boston. Well, here we are at Fenyer Hall, Boston's first market hall, built in 1742 by Peter Fenyer. The interior was destroyed by fire in 1761, but repaired 2 years later. The original building was only 2 floors, and what we see today is the result of an enlargement by Charles Bulfinch in 1805, which doubled its height and width. It was used for local government until 1822, and today still serves the people of Boston as a meeting place. Peter Fenyer's intention to provide both a meeting and marketplace continues today. The food stalls in Faneuil Hall are now accompanied just across the way by those in Quincy Market.
Guess what? It was named after Josiah Quincy, whose ancestor Edmund Quincy sailed over with John Cotton on the Griffin.
You're at it again. This whole area is a magnet to locals and tourists alike. There are more sites linked here to the Revolution than any other American city, which makes it a really interesting place to visit. It is also a thriving cultural center. Boston is home to orchestras like the Boston Symphony and Boston Pops, art galleries, and theaters. But commerce and brainpower is what makes the city tick. Boston is home to many universities, including MIT and, of course, Harvard. And before Edmund chips in again, I can tell you that John Cotton had a lifetime passion for education, was one of the founders of Harvard, and became one of its permanent governors in 1643.
But did you know that John Cotton's passion for education was shared by his children? Seaborn and John Cotton Jr. both became Harvard-trained clergy, while his daughter Maria married Increase Mather, the first American-born president of the college.
I guess education ran in his family. As we've seen, our Boston was founded by settlers from Britain, and our city owes its city name to its English counterparts. Meet Professor Wilford Holton. Will, besides teaching at the university, you also organized the American end of the historic Boston Partnership. What's that all about?
Well, in 1999, after 2 trips that I had made, we set up a partnership which includes a committee on each side of the Atlantic. I'm president of the partnership here in Boston, Massachusetts, and Judy Comic is chair of the committee in Boston, Lincolnshire.
And here, appropriately, in the American room at Whitehouse House, are Judy and John Camick. Judy, can you tell us what the partnership is trying to achieve?
We're trying to increase public awareness of the unique historical connections between the two Bostons and to develop lasting cultural, educational, religious and tourism links between the two communities.
Will, is it successful in these aims?
Yes, quite so. It's taken a while to get going, but we have a very fine exhibit that's making the rounds of various libraries here in our Boston.
Tell us about the way you're developing these links.
We're encouraging direct communication between groups and individuals using the internet, and also arranging people-to-people exchange programs. We have recently had a very successful pulpit exchange between the Reverend Chris Dalliston, Vicar of St Botolph's here, and the Reverend Steve Ayres of Old North Church in Boston, Massachusetts.
Now here is Will Holton talking to Chris Dalliston in the gardens next to the Old North Church.
When Reverend Ayres had the idea of the exchange of pulpits, what was your first reaction?
Well, we were very excited at the thought that we could do this. Obviously we were conscious of the links between the two town and the city, and of the kind of connections that have been made, but the opportunity of following that up and actually coming across here and learning some of that history firsthand was a wonderful opportunity, and we jumped at it, certainly.
Have you enjoyed your stay here with your family?
Oh, it's been great. The family have loved it. We've seen lots of things. We've met lots of lovely people. We've received a really warm welcome. And we have indeed discovered far more about the history and about how the early pioneers out here had kind of, from Boston, England, had kind of grown and developed this place. It's been absolutely fascinating, certainly.
We're now in the gardens of Whitehouse House. John, can you tell us about any other links?
Yes, there's a whole wealth of information about the links between the two Bostons. The Historic Boston's Partnership is trying to make people on both sides of the Atlantic much more aware of them. Hopefully this programme will create interest and encourage people to find out more about them all.
Let's hope it does. I certainly didn't realize the two Bostons had so much in common.
And Boston is not the only similar place name that you'll find if you look on a map of New England. There are several English namesakes, including Plymouth, Worcester, Stratford, and a whole host of others.
So why not join Edmund and me for more Tales of Two Cities? Until next time, it's goodbye from Boston, Massachusetts.
And it's cheerio from Boston in Lincolnshire.